Uh-oh, looks like we've got some drama in the comment section. Stay tuned. Hey, this is Chris at ABC Vintage Garage. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you're not subscribed, please take the time right now to subscribe, hit the bell. Please share us with your friends on other social sites and stuff like that. We've got, I think, about 3%, 4% of the people that are watching our videos subscribing. It would really help us a lot to reach other people that are into this content to find it, if you could help us with the algorithm. So back to the main story. Next, we're going to talk about left foot braking, and there's a couple of YouTube comments that people were specifically asking about it. At FPBIV, he asked about left foot braking, and at Gastify also asked about left foot braking and street driving. I don't personally use left foot braking on the street. The advantages to left foot braking, I first started reading about left foot braking, gosh, I don't know, it was probably back in the 70s, and it was when Stig Blomqvist, the Swedish rally driver who's a factory Saab driver, came to the US to do some showroom stock racing in a Saab, and everyone's like, okay, he's got the brakes on in the middle of the corner, yet he's outperforming everybody. What the hell is up with that? And so there was a lot of chatter, and eventually a magazine article about left foot braking, and it's something that the rally drivers with front wheel drive cars have been doing for a while. And basically what you're doing, if you remember the friction circle, if you're using some braking, you can't use that same traction for cornering, right? So basically in a front wheel drive car, the braking you're doing with the front is countered by the throttle that you're still using. So that those things you have to coordinate, right, to get the front drive that you want while still dragging the rear wheels and using up some of their traction so that the cars are more balanced, right? It's a good way to go through brake pads really fast if that's your goal. The advantage for turbocharged cars is if you don't get off the throttle, you maintain turbo boost, so you get better acceleration out of the turn. And on loose surfaces like gravel, of course, being able to toss the car sideways using those techniques is great. The problem is there's a lot of times then you'd want to shift somewhere in that process. And in the rally cars, of course, they use a non-synchro gearbox as a dog ring box. So you're just jamming it into whatever gear you want without using the clutch, and hoping the gearbox is strong enough to put up with that abuse. So can you use it on the street? Yes, you can. And I would practice left foot braking extensively, in your normal driving, to develop the sensitivity in your left foot to be able to control brake pressure, because the brakes are the strongest part of the car. We're used to mashing the clutch pedal, right? And if you're like I do, you're matching revs and you're double clutching and stuff like that, you don't have to have a lot of finesse with clutch release, right? Because you've got your speeds matched. So you just pop the clutch out and it's totally smooth, because the input shaft speed on the gearbox is exactly what the engine speed is, so there's no issue, right? So I have experimented with left foot braking personally, and not gotten to the point where I was proficient enough that I was ready to deploy it, right? So if you put the time and effort in, to develop the sensitivity in your left foot to be able to make that work, that's great. The other advantage is, even if you're releasing the throttle, you do gain a little bit of time by not having to move your foot from one pedal to the other. If you grew up racing go-karts, great. You've already got the left foot thing down. But for me, I don't use it. Again, and I think the advantage to using it is very small. If you're competing, if you're a rally driver, a race car driver, absolutely, go for it. Every tenth matters. Develop every advantage that you can. For street driving, I don't know that there's a reason to do that, but absolutely, you do you. Okay, so. Okay, so next, at Formula 370S, was talking about that you don't really want to go 8/10 in a car that's really inadequate to the purpose. And his example was, a Geo Metro, with no anti-roll bars, and it's just, there's so much body roll, blah blah blah. It's like, it's just, the car is not intended for this. So you really have to modify the car first. Um, I would disagree with that because I did not come from a background where I had every car I wanted or every ability to modify every car I owned or anything like that, right? So modest upbringing means that you use what you have. So 8/10 in a Geo Metro is going to be lower than 8/10 in a Miata, absolutely. Um, but you're still driving at 80% of what the maximum that you can do with that car in its current condition with the tires that are on it and all that. So is it unsafe? No, I don't believe it's unsafe. I don't think that there's a car that if you are driving within your skill set and within the car's performance envelope that you're unsafe. It's just that the envelopes are going to be different with different cars. So I would say, no matter what you own and what you have to drive in the mountains, that you should still enjoy driving. You should still pick good lines. You should still practice trail braking. You should still do all the things that we talk about, no matter what you own. And I've done this in, Isuzu Rodeo with 16-inch truck tires, load range D tires, not performance tires. I've hunted Porsches in the mountains in my Eurovan. It's like, it's endless. Right, and I would suggest that anything that you have, if you work on your driving, you will be surprised at how well you keep up with everybody else in their fancier or faster cars, because it's not the car, right? It's the driver way more than the car. So work on your skills, the skills you get to keep with you, and not worry so much about the car. Okay. At JU Racing was asking about tire pressure settings for road and track driving and the difference between those two scenarios. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. The difference between those two scenarios is the types of tires that are going to be on a track focused vehicle are going to be performance tires, right? You're not going to be running like comfort all season touring tire on the track. They will get destroyed pretty quick. So you're using a tire with a fairly stiff sidewall. So now it's about balancing heat and wear with pressure, because the lower your pressures are, the more grip you have, unless you're overheating the tire and the tire is losing performance because it's too hot. So if you're in a light car with good sticky tires, your pressures are going to be pretty low. Not like, because when I was racing, I was in a 2,500 pound car. With me in the car is 2,700 pounds with a 205 section tire. Not much tire for that weight of a car. So I was running more pressure. I was also running a DOT rated R compound tire that was available at the time, and the tires have and more capable since then. So what I would say is, if you want to experiment, go play in two PSI steps and see how the car feels, and come to a conclusion on your own based on your car, your driving, your tires, and see what you like the best. And the other thing I'd say on street is that you're not likely to overheat your tires, right? We don't get to run them so hard that the tires really get that hot on the street. So you're not going to have like the tire pressure rise that I experienced on track or anything like that. So the tires aren't going to change much. Yeah, they're going to be lower pressure when you start, and they're going to be higher pressure when you finish, but they're not going to feel significantly different. Okay, next, at Leonid Reuter 4275 said, I sometimes struggle with deciding if I should brake lightly in advance, brake heavily right before turning, though this usually makes the turn sketchy because of the large weight transfer, or try to drop speed without braking. But in this case, I often lose too much speed in the corner due to loss of traction. He says, generally, I try to prioritize smoothness over heavy inputs, especially on public roads. So what I would say is, this is like 90% of driving fast, right? Is how do you manage, braking before and during corner entry without scrubbing off too much speed, without upsetting the car, and how do you maximize that? And that's going to be the techniques you use that we've been talking about are going to be the same regardless of what kind of car you have. But this specific, like brake pressure, is going to be different with every car, and where it all happens is going to be not the same with every car. So it's I'd say that smoothness over heavy inputs on public roads, absolutely, yeah, for sure that. Your initial brake application should be smooth and progressive. Your brake release should be smooth and progressive to the point that you can't feel it. But what your specific speed is going to vary. On the street, you're leaving a lot of leeway. So I would say, you're not going to be really late braking. You're not going to, like on a racetrack, you're going to want to condense that. When you figure out where your end of braking point is and how much rotation you need, how much braking you need to rotate the car, then you can see, like, okay, how much maximum braking do I need? How much space do I need for that? And you can move your beginning of braking point closer to your turn-in point to maximize your straight line speed on the straightaway for as long as you can. On the street, that stuff is like, no, you're not going to be at maximum anyway, right? So I suppose you could say, okay, well, I can shorten it up so that I'm at 80% through all this stuff, but really, it's gonna be more about your smoothness and getting the car to behave how you want than it's going to be about like optimizing it for maximum speed. Now, if you go to the racetrack and get some professional instruction, yes, work on finding the limit, right? Work on getting close to the limit, finding it, because then you know what's actually available. You know how much what you're backing away from to get to your 7/10 or your 8/10, right? You know what the car and you are capable of. But not everyone can afford to do a bunch of driver schools, right? I couldn't, right? So that's something that if you can afford it, absolutely rock it out. I would totally do that before I'd modify the car, invest in you, right? So I would do that. But like this is gonna for Leonid, he's gonna have to do some experimentation on the road to find out exactly what he wants, how the car behaves the best. But it's gonna follow that diagram, right? It's gonna be fairly heavy braking to your turn-in point, and then a gradual release of the brakes as you turn into the corner until you've completely released the brakes, and then throttle towards the apex and unwinding the steering. In fact, you're probably unwinding the steering a little bit before the apex because of the line that you've taken through the corner, right? So as soon as you can start to unwind the steering wheel, start to get on the throttle, you want to do that because your corner exit speed is going to be determined by when you do that. And especially if you're in an underpowered car, heck, you might be at full throttle before the apex. I often am, right? So it just depends. What gear am I in? How big is the corner? If I'm in third or fourth gear, I'm telling you, it's like it doesn't take me long to get to full throttle. The car didn't accelerate that hard. It doesn't upset the car to be at full throttle. If you're driving a 300 or 400 horsepower car, you can't do that, right? You've got to ease the throttle on gradually through the corner exit until you've got the steering wheel completely straight to give it full throttle. I don't have to do that because I've got a fifth or less of the power that you have, right? So that's something that you're gonna find through experimentation. Okay, next we have at Zenodobas. Um, Talk about how one can spot the mistakes they're making. For example, if the car is understeering in a corner, it could mean either A, entry speed was too much, or B, steering was too sharp, or C, something else, right? So that is good. What I would say is start with working on the trail braking, and see if, because corner entry speed too high, your corner entry speed is going to be determined by how much trail braking you need to put how much force on the front tires to get the car to turn the way you want it to. So your entry speed, if you were driving like the in slow out fast method that I was taught initially, if you were going to do that, then your entry speed, if you were understeering, would be much lower than your entry speed if you were coming in trail braking and you had some weight on the nose to help the tires grip, right? So steering was too sharp. Again, that's a possibility. If you're kind of following what I'm talking about with a late apex, your initial steering input isn't very sharp. So the chances of you overloading the front tires on corner entry are going to be more caused by not enough weight on the, not enough force on the tires, more than it's going to be about a sharp steering input. Because the steering input is going to be determined by the corner itself. So that's like you reading the road and setting your corner entry speed based on what you see, and can, the totality of that, is there gravel, is there wildlife, is there something in the way, is the road wet, is it dry, all those things, right? So you're going to be making your determination of what a reasonable corner entry speed is. And if your car is understeering on the way in, I would say you need more trail braking. So it's not that your corner entry speed was necessarily too high, it's maybe you released pressure on the brakes too soon or too much. So that would be what I would suggest for that. I had someone else suggest or ask about who's watching all the videos you see at the Nürburgring of the tourist laps and people crashing their cars on the tourist laps, and was asking me, how can you if you're all out of shape, how can you save it? And there are some things you can do to save stuff, right? I mean, you can, like if your car's starting to spin, point your front wheels where you want to go and give it some throttle, right? Because you want to shift weight to the back, you want to stabilize the car, and you want it to go where you want it to go when it grips. So there's that. If your car is understeering off the road, again, take steering out, right? Because you're on the back side of that curve, right? So here's your tire grip to slip angle curve, you're over here. More steering makes it worse, right? So you're already scrubbing off speed like crazy, right? So I would say take steering out and get, gently apply brake, get off the throttle if you're on the throttle, something, right? What you want to do is you want to get more weight on the nose of the car. So maybe that's just a quick lift. Maybe that's just, if you're on the throttle, ease off the throttle, take steering out. You reduce your slip angle, so you've actually increased the grip of your front tires, right? So then maybe you can make the corner, right? So there's things you can do when you're having a problem. But I told him a better idea is to look at those videos and try to determine what got him into trouble in the first place. Look back to where they first show up in the picture and see, okay, where's their car placement? What are they doing? Are they ready for that turn? Are they not ready? Or what bad choices are they making before it got unrecoverable, right? And what I see mostly is that people's eyes aren't far enough down the road, right? They're focused on the car ahead of them, and that car's lying through the turn, or when his brake lights are coming on or going off or whatever, and they're not focused as far as they can see, so they can place the car where they need to place the car and accurately judge what their corner entry speed should be, right? So if you want to watch those videos for entertainment, you can, but for education, it's going to be about okay, what all these people made mistakes, right? They all, crashed their car at the Nürburgring. There was a huge tow bill, whatever track damage that they did, they're going to have to pay for. It's like, you don't want to crash at the Nürburgring. That's a bad thing, right? So when you look at those, look at, okay, what got them into that spot? Because they got something, there was a cascade of events that happened that became unrecoverable, right? So, it's not about, okay, once they're in the unrecoverable place, is there a way to recover? Probably not. But way back, when they were setting up for that corner, there was something they could have done differently. So you need to go back and see, how do you avoid putting yourself in that situation, not how do you recover from that situation. That would be my advice. Semi-trailing arm rear suspension. This is something that did not even occur to me to really talk about when I'm discussing trail braking. Cars built in the, call it 1990s and later, are all biased towards understeer. So the big issue for people driving fast is like, how do I get the car to turn, right? How do I overcome the understeer that's naturally built into the cars? And it's because understeer is safer, and the manufacturers put that in there so that people, if they overcook a corner and they lift off the throttle, the car doesn't try to swap ends or do anything crazy. And if you do that, if you're a little bit over speed and you come into a corner and you ease off the throttle, you'll scrub off the speed, and that should bring you into equilibrium, and you'll have enough front grip to make the corner, right? So that's why that's done. And even in race cars, at the top levels, they're biased towards understeer intentionally for stability at high speeds, right? So overcoming understeer is a big deal. Now, if you've got an early Porsche 911 or a BMW 2002 or any of the BMWs built kind of before, the E34, something like that, then they're going to have semi-trailing arm rear suspension. And one of the properties of semi-trailing arm rear suspension is they have a lot of toe change and camber change with suspension movement, right? So when the suspension is compressed, they toe in, and when it's in rebound, they toe out. So when you think about what the standard ride height is, anything that the back of the car is lifted a little bit from that, you're going to be increasing toe out, and anything that's squatting, you're going to be increasing toe in. So those cars love you to corner with a little bit of throttle, right? Because that's a more stable condition. If you release the throttle, especially suddenly or not smoothly, the back end of the car rises, the tires toe out, the outside rear tire, the one with the weight on it, is going to pull the back end of the car around. And so for early cars like a 911 or something like that, it's really pronounced because of the rear weight bias. For a BMW, it's less pronounced, but those cars are kind of notorious for having trailing throttle oversteer. So when we're talking about trail braking into a corner, all these things still apply, but you just have to be aware that this is a tendency that's going to be exaggerated in your car if you're driving one. So if you're coming into a corner hot and you're using trail braking in a 2002 or a 911 or something like that, be prepared, right? Because the back end's coming around, which of course is kind of what you want. You're trying to rotate the car in the beginning of the corner so that you can straighten the steering wheel and start applying throttle, which will stabilize the car, right? So it's not that it's impossible to do, but of course everyone's heard stories about the novice 911 driver that has, gone through the guardrail back end first, right? So you just want to be aware. Okay, so next in line, we haven't talked at all about shifting, right? Part of that is because I don't know how many in the audience are still driving manual transmission cars. I believe that that's kind of like mandatory for this kind of driving, but I don't know. There's probably people out there with dual clutch gearboxes or paddle shift or something like that are perfectly happy with that. But what I want to talk about is that all these things that you do, the more, the closer you are to the limit, the more your smoothness matters, right? So it's just like there's physics takes over. Your choices get narrowed down, right? If you have the most options when you're driving at parking lot speeds, you know, and you've got an excess of traction in every direction, and you can do anything you want with the car, right? You can't, you know, spin out at 5 miles an hour, right? So as you go faster, what you can do with the car keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So your smoothness in brake application and release and steering and all your, you know, when we talk about progressive control inputs, all that stuff really matters when you get closer to the limits of traction, right? So shifting should be done as smoothly as possible. Like we talk about imperceptible brake release, the same thing is true with shifting, right? Your goal should be, like when you're approaching a corner, especially in an underpowered car, you want to be in the right gear to maximize your acceleration out. So that means you're going to be downshifting, right? So it's going to be important for you to practice your downshifting so that is smooth and doesn't upset the car in any way. So we talked a little bit, I don't know, we talked about it in none of the videos. We talked a little bit about it in the comments section about rev matching and double clutch. If you don't know, you know, I think we've actually briefly talked about that in terms of how I do it on one of the other videos, but learn how to do that and practice that, because that will matter. Now, usually you're downshifting in a relatively straight line, under braking, heading into a corner. So being able to heel and toe is important, but because your car is there's not a bunch of cornering forces on it. It's not going to upset the car if you're not perfect, right? But you want to strive to be perfect, and that means making it part of your daily driving habits, right? So look at every time you have to downshift as an opportunity to perfect those skills. And the same thing goes for upshifting. I had someone in the comments ask about like speed shifting, you know, like jamming into a higher gear, and you know, do race drivers do that, and drag racers do that. Road racers don't do that, right? Because we have a longer race and we don't want to ruin the transmission, right? We don't want to do anything that's hard on the car. We want the car to last, right? So we're going to upshift in a way that's smooth, right? And that's something that's not difficult to do. It's very easy to do. So just work on that. That's something you should be practicing. Next, we're going to skip this one. I come back to it. Race car seat placement. So we talked about you know, the relationship between the seat and the pedals, and I mentioned that in the race car you can place the seat anywhere you want, so getting the exact pedal placement is fairly easy. What I didn't say is I had to cut the roll cage out of my car to make room to place the seat where I needed to. So it's not like, oh, you can place the seat wherever you want. It's like you need to place the seat wherever you want, and if that means you've got to cut the old roll cage out and build a new roll cage for the car so that you can place the seat where you want, it's that important. You should do that. Okay. So now the last thing that I'm gonna talk about, this is like things that I wanted to talk about, was the friction circle. So one of the commenters asked if I had read Piero Taruffi's book. So Piero Taruffi wrote The Technique of Motor Racing in like 1958 or 59. It's like the first book about how to drive a race car. Piero Taruffi had a 25-year career. He raced for Ferrari and Maserati and Lancia and Mercedes and a bunch of different companies over a 25-year period. And oddly, he discusses this, right? So this is like before Mark Donohue, right? So it predates Mark Donohue's stuff. Mark Donohue probably read his book. So the originator of this concept is actually Piero Taruffi. And here's my very poorly drawn Piero Taruffi or friction circle diagram. And I was going to try to explain it a little bit better than I did before using a string, right? So you have braking, acceleration, left and right. You've only got so much traction, and you use it like in a certain, you can use it in combination, but you only have so much, right? So you can brake and turn, or turn and accelerate, but the more you accelerate, the less you can turn, right? The more you brake, the less you can turn. The more you turn, the less you can brake, right? So that's how that works. Now, this value though is variable, right? So let's say this is 8/10 of a G, right? So 8/10 of the acceleration due to gravity, right? If that is what it is, maybe in a steady state. So like if you're on a skid pad and you're going around in a circle and you ease up to that speed, you would be able to measure that at that rate. Now, your friction circle though is individual for each tire, and it's going to depend on how much actual like force is acting on that tire. So it could be that under braking, your front tires, you've got this, right? Your rear tires, when you're under braking, you've got this, right? So by using trail braking, you're changing the relationship of the grip between the front and the rear, and that's how you're killing understeer, right? You're increasing the grip in the front and you're decreasing the grip in the rear using weight transfer as your tool. Now, Piero Taruffi, in his book, did not advocate trail braking, right? But Piero Taruffi retired in 1957, right? He won the Mille Miglia, the last year of running of the Mille Miglia, and that is an open road race, right? So a lot of the stuff in his book is not really about circuit racing, it's about open road racing. It's the Targa Florio, it's Mille Miglia, you know, it was a different time. He never drove a car with disc brakes, right? So in his book, he's talking about conserving the brakes. Like the initial slowing down for a curve is just you're off the throttle. So you're getting off the throttle really early and then judging when you want to use the brakes and when you don't want to use the brakes, because you need brakes at the end of the race, right? So if you use them now at the beginning of the race, you won't have brakes at the end of the race. Your brakes will be too hot, right? So you'll have brake fade early, right? So this is something that we almost never have to deal with, right? It's like with modern cars, the brakes are really, really good. So he's not advising trail braking or using brakes to balance the car or anything like that, because if he did that back when he was racing, he wouldn't have brakes, right? The brakes would be overcooked. Okay, now we get to get into your comments, the fun part. Okay, so Karma-Larky. Karma-Larky said, for follow-up, maybe consider the difference between front drive, rear wheel drive, front engine, mid-engine, rear engine regarding corner approach, risks, etc. So every car is different. So the techniques we talk about are applicable to every car, but the specific amount of brake pressure or steering input or whatever is going to vary based on your car and the results you're trying to get, right? So, for example, right, we're talking about like a front-wheel drive car like my little 128, you know, has 60% of the weight on the front wheels, it wants to understeer naturally. The weight is way out in the front of the car, like over the front wheels. An X19, which is like it has the same engine, the engine's behind the driver, it's a little bit heavier car, but it's going to behave differently. It's got, you know, 57% of the weight on the back of the car, right? So things change dynamically when that happens. Also, the weight's distributed differently. So even if the center of gravity is a little bit different, where the weight is on that axis is different, right? So we haven't really talked about this. Low polar moment of inertia versus high polar moment of inertia, right? So the reason that all of the top race cars now that are like dedicated race cars are mid-engine is to get low polar moment of inertia. So that is like the center of gravity is you know, in near the center of the car, but also the most of the mass is there too, right? So if you've got a front engine car with a transaxle, right, now you've moved the drivetrain out to the ends of the car. So it's like if you've got like a 5-pound weight that's just a lead ball, you can spin it in your hand like this. If you take 2.5 pounds and put them at the ends of a 6-foot broom, spinning that weight is going to be difficult because that the change in the polar moment, right? So how do I want to say this? The mid-engine example is going to respond quicker and more easily to changes in control input. So when you turn the steering wheel, it doesn't take as much force to turn the car. If you've got like a Porsche 928 or a Corvette, you know, C5 or whatever with front engine and transaxle, those cars are designed for stability over maneuverability, right? So it takes more tire, more force to get the car to turn, but it also is less likely to be affected by road stuff, you know, camber changes or changes in the road surface or side winds and things like that, right? So differences, mid-engine, rear engine, front drive, rear drive. This is something that you need to, I mean, you're used to the way your car drives. So you are going to employ these techniques in a way that gets you the results you want. So what I would say is if you're in a mid-engine car, you're going to need to be smoother with your control inputs and probably requires less input from you, less steering angle, less brake pressure, everything. The car's going to turn and respond. It's part of the joys of having that type of car, is that it's very responsive to what you do. If you've got you know, a heavier car that's all-wheel drive, yeah, it's going to be, you know, you're going to have to use a little bit more force to get it to do some of the stuff you want it to do. But most of those cars have power-assisted everything, so your control input forces may not be that different, right? That's part of the engineer's job, is to make it feel natural. So I hope that answers those questions. Okay, next up we have Rogue TS1. Very entertaining video, great knowledge transfer. Love the interlude music between subjects. Thank you, Gary. It fits the mood perfectly. P.S. This is NASCAR country. That term is pushing, not understeer. And so that means oversteer is the car's loose. So if you're an oval track guy, I apologize. I was raised in an understeer and oversteer household. Let's see, probably should explain a bit more on how one can control weight transfer using throttle and or brakes. So any change in acceleration or deceleration affects weight transfer, right? So he's talking about throttle and brakes, so that's that weight transfer. This weight transfer is also left to right, but that's steering input, right? So if you are, you know, going into a corner, usually you're off the throttle. Usually you're slowing down for the corner. If you're driving in an enthusiastic manner, you come to the corner on a tight, twisty road, which is kind of what we do. You're coming up to the corner and you've eased off the throttle. You're maybe on the brakes. Once you've turned into the corner, any change in brake pressure or throttle opening is going to affect weight transfer front or rear. How close you are to the limit will affect whether that actually makes the car behave differently. And so there are situations where, like if you turned into a corner a little bit hot, or maybe you turned in a little bit early, misjudged your apex, and you need to tuck the car in a little bit, like maybe the turn tightened up a little bit. Sometimes a little lift on the throttle is enough to rotate the car a little bit and get you to the apex. Sometimes you need gentle brake application, and what I'm just going to say is it gentle, right? So smooth and progressive control inputs are important. You don't want to shock the tires, right? So especially in the situation where you've made a mistake and you've misjudged something, you definitely have to be gentle with the car, or it's going to cause you a problem. So hopefully that answers that question, and we'll go on to the next one. Okay, so Smells Like Bad Lyrics, great name, says, I would love to learn about how uphill, downhill affects grip and weight transfer. So I had someone else besides Smells Like Bad Lyrics, try to get me to clarify this. So just going uphill or just going downhill doesn't affect grip or weight transfer. What affects it is the rate of change of going uphill or going downhill, right? So if you've got a road that's quickly going up, your momentum of your car is going to push your car down into the road, and that's going to increase grip. If you've got a crest, so you feel light in the seat, right? So less than gravitational force because you're going over a crest, that's going to reduce grip, right? So, and on the roads that we enjoy, right? So in the mountains, right? What makes roads fun is elevation change, right? So all the fun roads are in the mountains, right? There's no fun roads in the flat, right? Or maybe there's some, if they're on the riverbank or something like that. But basically, mountains are what causes roads to have to turn and climb and fall, right? So there's going to be sort of a roller coaster effect, right? That some curves are going to be banked, some turns are going to be off camber, some are going to be rising, some are going to be falling, and it's going to be a combination. If you have a combination of turns, you got to be able to visually look out there all the way to the horizon and plot your line through this changing environment, taking all these things into account. But again, you've got your seat adjusted right, you've got good feel through the steering wheel, right? So the car's talking to you. So you'll be able to feel things and be able to fine tune and improve over time, right? So it is not just, if you're just steadily going uphill and the grade's the same, once the car has settled on its suspension, it's going to rise back up to standard ride height, then there's going to be no change. When it's going from flat to uphill, there's going to be a time that it's going to adjust, and that's going to depend on your spring rates and your damper rates. So the stiffer your springs, the quicker that adjustment period is, and also the more exaggerated it is, right? If you've got a very softly suspended car and you hit a bump, it's going to take a long time for the springs to compress, and then it's going to rebound and maybe go through a couple of oscillations and stuff like that. So, if you're driving an old Buick or a camper or something like that, slow down. This could be a problem. But anyway, so that's how it affects weight transfer. It's just basically the inertia of your car pushing it down into the road or lifting it up off the road. I cannot pronounce this. I don't know how to pronounce this, but thank you for the question. And it's a really deep question, right? Can you please talk about risk? What is too much? How does one get a sense of margin of safety? So you get a sense of margin of safety through experience, and that experience is best gained on a closed course, on a racetrack with professional instruction. Before you find yourself at the limit or over the limit, you don't really know. The other thing that I can say is, a snowy parking lot can teach you a lot about this stuff, but you have to be really sensitive because the forces acting on the car are much less. Right, so it feels really different. The car still does all the same stuff that it would do in the dry. It just does it at a much lower speed and lower force level. So that's good. That's a way that you can feel when the car is oversteering or understeering at a lower speed, at lower risk, where there's nothing you can crash into or hit, and you're not going to go off the road. What is too much? Too much, again, in my opinion, on the street is more than 8/10. 7/10 if you have a passenger. So you need to have some idea of where the limit is and keep that 30 or 20% in reserve for mistakes, right? We're all human, right? We're all going to misjudge stuff sometimes. Sometimes we miss something, right? So, or something in the environment suddenly changes, right? So, you know, a deer jumps out into the road that you couldn't see because it was behind a bush or whatever, right? You need to have some grip and skill in reserve to deal with things that are outside of your control. So too much is treating the road like it's your own personal racetrack. So risk is a right. I drive race cars and ride motorcycles, right? I am willing to accept a certain amount of risk in my life for an enjoyment return. I can't tell you what is the right balance for you. I've had some people in the comments say that anything over the speed limit is unethical and wrong, and that's one opinion. It probably makes 80% of the drivers on the road wrong, right? If you've gone out on the freeways, at least in Georgia or any state I've ever lived in, you'll find the majority of the people are driving at least 1 mile per hour over the speed limit, right? And then it's like, okay, well, what about the people driving, a half a mile per hour or a quarter mile per hour? It's a very black and white view. It's like, it's the speed limit or nothing. But they have a right to that opinion, and I hope that if they have that opinion, that is how they drive, right? That they actually do that. So risk, that is something that you have to decide for yourself. That's going to occur in every aspect of your life, and I can't help you with that beyond saying that you need to determine that internally. All right, next question. Okay, now we get to some really interesting stuff. So at TDCF2 made this comment. TDCF2 is like a secondary site for the driving channel files. And we've had several comments from this guy because he's a driving aficionado of in some ways, but the focus, near as I can tell, is on defensive driving and mostly beginning drivers. So it's like, what is the safest possible approach to driving a car? And this is, I'm including the description on his channel to give you some background. So this is primarily a legacy channel putting down key material learned from the very best in over 50 years of advanced driving. Many of those were either then current or former UK police advanced course instructors, considered by many to be practitioners of the safest road driving techniques in the world. The channel does not follow the normal YouTube theme of actively chasing subscribers or viewers. However, if you like and appreciate the content, subscribing and liking will obviously be appreciated. Comments or suggestions are always welcome. So if you want to check out the TDCF1 or TDCF2 YouTube channels, please go ahead and do that. So here's his comment. Chris, you commented in a previous video that your prime concern is to help drivers be safer on the road. My ex-Hendon friend, that's like Northwest London, he was an instructor at the school, pointed me to steering at around 5 in your video, and there you are really getting crossed up using race technique on the road. That approach to steering leaves absolutely no leeway in case of an emergency or if things change dramatically in the bend. Therefore, is principally about as unsafe as you can get for steering in road conditions. In that previous video, you were explaining about rear wheel skids in bends, which is basically the result of poor observation and planning together with a lack of systematic approach to setting up a vehicle for a curved path. And your steering, add your steering to that, and there is principally no hope. That would be another instant off-road job. Okay, so very critical of what I was saying about the steering. And what he says here about, the cause of a rear wheel skid in a bend is the result of poor planning is absolutely true, right? We're talking about driving at 7 to 8 tenths, right? So you should still be, 30% back of the limit, right? So if you go into a turn and the rear end comes around, then that means that you've messed something up if you're on the street, right? So the reason that I am a proponent of holding the steering wheel the way I described is because if that does happen, if you do mess up, you need to know where straight ahead is. So the situation that he's talking about, like, let's say that you've got understeer or oversteer, right? You've gone into the turn too fast. You messed up. Right now, the front end is skidding or the back end is skidding. It's a really tight turn, so you've got your arms crossed, right? More lock is not the answer in that situation. It's never the answer in that situation, right? Doesn't fix understeer. Right, if you're understeering, you're on the back side of that curve, right? We're talking about that on your tires, right? You've got your slip angle to grip curve. It goes kind of like this, right? So if you're understeering, you're out here somewhere, right? More steering lock makes understeer worse. The answer is less steering lock, right? It's never more, right? So the fact that you're already near your maximum or whatever doesn't matter. What matters is that you know where straight ahead is, so that if you get into a mess, you have a way to get out. You have to have a reference point. If you're oversteering, or excuse me, don't need to put that out there. If you're oversteering, right, if the back end of the car is sliding and you're like this, the answer is also less steering lock, right? It's unwinding the steering and probably turning the steering wheel past the center the other way to catch it. But you have to know where straight ahead is to recover, right? So I understand where he's coming from because this, right? They are defensive driving professionals, right? So their concern is don't get into a situation where you're going to lose traction. They're like, look as far ahead as you can see, keep your speed well within the envelope, and you'll never have to deal with the car losing control, right? What I was saying is that for the people that I'm talking to, which is about how to drive fast on twisty roads, these are generally not beginning drivers. They generally are driving high-performance cars, and they've already made the decision that they like driving fast for their own enjoyment, right? So for those people, I want to give them the tools to keep them from throwing their cars into the trees. Okay, so next one, David Daw 999. So David Daw is the instructor that this guy knows, the first guy. And so he came with this beautifully, softly worded question. Chris, I'm wondering if you can help me. I drive a rear-wheel drive car and I'm experiencing oversteer. You recommend getting more weight onto the rear wheels, but how do I do that? If my rear tires are starting to slide mid-corner, then the only way I can see to get more weight on them is to transfer weight by accelerating. If I apply more throttle to accelerate, then the rear tires are already losing grip. I don't see how that can work, right? So Dave is trying to lay a trap, right? So I responded to Dave like, okay, maybe you're driving a vintage car. Most modern cars are biased towards understeer. And it turns out that Dave responded, turns out he's driving an MGB GT, right? So this is a vintage sports car with a solid rear axle and leaf spring suspension that's known to be like a big oversteering car, right? So this is it. I don't know if David is actually driving this car in such a way that the rear end is sliding. I sincerely doubt it, since he's a driving instructor at this school, or a past driving instructor, right? So he's going to be advocating that you look far ahead and that you set your speed early and you have a plan and you don't run into this, right? So he's asking this question, but here's the answer to the question anyway. The answer to the question is, if you've got a car that's oversteering and you're trying to shift weight to the back, what you do is you gently add throttle. If the reason this car is oversteering is that you've already added too much throttle, and so you're in a power slide, your rear tires are spinning, it's not going to help, because it's not going to shift any weight to the rear, because the car's not going to accelerate, right? So what I would say in this situation is that you add a little bit of throttle and see if it helps. If it does not help, then you got a different situation, right? So now you're talking about taking steering out or whatever. But the techniques still work even in an understeering, or even in a car that naturally is an oversteering car. What you have to be aware of is that there's different reasons for this car to be oversteering. He could have just come into the corner hot. If he just came into the corner hot and the car is oversteering because it's a naturally oversteering car, it's like just biased that way, then some throttle is going to help, right? And that's going to be the majority of the situation, right? If your car is oversteering on the street, the chances are you've misjudged, right? So if this guy was actually asking that, because what happens if I go into a corner and I've misjudged and the car is oversteering, my answer to add throttle will help. If the reason he's oversteering is because he went in slow and now has added a bunch of throttle because he's got a big torquey V8 and skinny tires, and now the car is oversteering, yeah, it's going to oversteer more because he's provoked the oversteer with throttle. But you'd have to do that intentionally. So, trick question from David. Thank you, David. Oh, what do you know? It's another question from David. How do bigger brakes offer an advantage when going downhill unless the smaller ones are fading? So this is a good question. I would say they don't unless the smaller ones are fading. Your total braking performance is determined by the grip of your tires, right? So it's independent of the size of your brakes or anything like that, right? So it's about grip. If you have a vintage car like my little Fiat 128, which has kind of small brakes, and you're going fast downhill, fade is going to be an issue, and there's things you can do to address that fade, right? You can either duct air to the brakes, you can go to a different pad with a different compound, or you can go to bigger brakes. I ended up going to bigger brakes and a rear wheel disc brake conversion on my car, but that is because I knew that I was going to be driving hard and I knew that the original brakes were kind of weak, right? So do bigger brakes offer an advantage? Only if the brakes on your car now are fading. Okay, another one from David. I'm still not clear about something, Chris. I realize that there is a host of factors that decide whether a car understeers or oversteers, such as roll center heights, sway bar stiffness, wheel camber, toe in or out, etc. You tell us that if your car is understeering, you need to get more weight on the front, and if it's oversteering, you need more weight on the rear. Where I am confused is that cars that are heavy on the front end, such as your Fiat 128 or a Mini, basically tend towards understeer. The opposite is true. A car with a pronounced weight bias to the rear, such as an old Porsche 911, is going to tend towards oversteer. What I don't understand is how and why putting more weight on the end that is already heavy is going to make things better. And here David is playing a little bit of a game, right? So when we talk about weight transfer, we're not talking about like moving something in the car that's heavy from one end of the car to the other and setting it down and bolting it in place and changing the dynamic or the static weight distribution of the car. What we're talking about is the forces that your tires are producing is acting on the center of gravity, which is a certain height above the road, and that's causing the car to change its attitude, right? So you're compressing the springs in the front, the back is lifting under braking, or it's rolling to the right or rolling to the left. You're not changing where the weight is in the car. You're not changing the center of gravity of the car in any way, right? So your natural balance of the car is not changed. What you're changing is the force that's acting on the tires, which is changing the tires' performance envelope, right? So yes, all the things he's talking about, roll centers, and we can get into suspension design theory and roll axes and all this kind of stuff, but it really doesn't matter. Whatever your car is, it is, right? Whatever its performance envelope is, it is, right? However your car was designed, those characteristics are baked in. So the techniques I'm talking about are what you can do as a driver to overcome maybe deficiencies in the car, or just to work within what your car's envelope is to get the best results. So again, for David, we're not adding weight to the front of a front-wheel drive car. We're temporarily using the tires to change their behavior by putting a force on the center of gravity of the car that pushes those tires into the ground more. Because as your springs compress, or as they extend, you're taking force off of those tires or adding force to those tires, and that affects the total capability of those tires, right? So, okay, so that's basically it for this episode of Canyon Carving 102. Thank you so much for viewing. If you're still here, rock and roll, like and subscribe, hype, whatever. Anything you can do, we greatly appreciate. And of course, thank you so much. Talk to you soon.